Angus, you know what to do.
I do.
Clap us in. Welcome along to the Whiskey Stories podcast with myself, Graham Colgate. We are not in the Athletic Arms. For people watching on the YouTube channel, you will know that we are not in the back room at Diggers, sandwiched nicely between the bar and the gents' toilets. No, we've gone up in the world. We've finally made it, Ross.
Yeah, this is the best looking table before a podcast starting I've ever seen.
We've got drams on the table. It's looking good.
We do.
But we've made it, Angus. We've made it to SWE, Scotch Whisky Experience.
We have
Scotch Whisky Experience.
almost half our guests have at one time or another worked here. I think.
It does feel like
Most of our listeners or people who have been in the podcast who are maybe watching this on the YouTube channel be going, I know that room.
yeah.
I've been in. I know those people. They're at SWE.
And it's so interesting because we've referenced it for the last nearly 2 years.
Can anyone tell me the episode?
Oh, what you visited here for the first time for
We
the
did.
Yeah, but it
Distillers
wasn't
Fair.
episode. The first episode that the Scotch Whisky Experience was mentioned was episode number 5.
Out of 72?
This is 79
79.
or 70.
Wowzers.
One of the 70s.
Wowzers.
Anyway.
So
Cody
who-
Reynolds.
Cody Reynolds, of course.
Let me just go back through my book
Number
here.
6 or something.
It was episode number 5.
Okay,
Cody Reynolds on the 9th of November
there
2023.
you go.
That's their because
And then a month later, you visited for the first time.
Well, he was the first person, the first Illuminati. Of
Illuminati.
Because they run the whiskey industry. But,
Run by the whiskey industry.
and we've mentioned it. So how many other people have we had on the podcast?
It's amazing. It's amazing, actually. I was just saying, and we'll get into it, I'm sure, because we've got 3 fantastic guests. As
Yeah.
our visual visual viewers rather than audio listeners can see. It's people that not only have continued to work in whiskey, people that are now doing whiskey as their full-time career,
Yeah.
and that have been real success stories in whiskey,
Yeah.
that have maybe come and said, you know what, and maybe they're visiting Scotland, they're from all over the world, let's try to do something. Oh, working the Scotch Whisky Experience, what a great experience while living in Edinburgh.
Absolutely.
Or whether you're coming to Ali Baxter, coming down from big old Gordonston up in the northeast, watching Glen Murray from his bedroom window, going, do you know what? The Scotch Whisky Experience is the place for me, and then leaving and coming back, etc.
You know, I think we've talked about it on the podcast a lot, and we've mentioned it as the whiskey youth development system. Although somebody who isn't in the youthful side of it, a person who has worked here, and I'm surprised, Ross, that this is one of the few places that we've managed to find
That I
in the
haven't
whiskey
worked.
that you haven't worked
Yeah,
in
very good.
your illustrious career of 7 years.
Yeah,
But
thanks.
your dad actually
Yeah.
worked here as well.
Yeah, Whiskey Dad and Lad, Robert Bard, he messaged me today. He was so excited that we had these fantastic 3 guests on.
Yeah.
He said that he was doing nursing, working psychosis for 20 years,
Yeah.
and left and done 2 years. I think weekends. I don't know. I think done weekend tours, for example. He's just talking about doing the master classes here. Said he's never enjoyed a job so much.
And I don't know if anyone who's listening, I don't know if you've watched the movie, Ross, or not, but Angus might get this reference, but the Shawshank Redemption.
Is that not something about prison?
Yeah, and the halfway house that everyone leaves, and there's a beam, like that beam there,
Okay.
of everyone that leaves and goes into this halfway house, and they score their name into that beam. I can see your dad's name
Bobby
just up
Barr.
on that one, along with all the other guys. But no, it's fantastic
amazing.
beer. But
It's amazing.
before
We've got
we
some great
do,
guests.
before we do get started, though, we do have to say a big shout out. Last week we were at Insterney Distillery,
were.
back in the kingdom of Fife,
Yeah.
trying proper Fife whiskey.
Absolutely.
That's what we're doing. It was
Yeah.
fantastic, and this is part of our first ever collaboration that we've done with an organisation in the whiskey industry. So a big thanks to Scott and Daniel for showing us around the distillery last week. It was good fun.
It was great. And yeah, letting us try their newer releases as
What was
well.
your highlight, Angus?
Just seeing the fact that we're going into a distillery that
Yeah.
hasn't been open to the public. Not many people have seen.
You had a good laugh at the sample room, didn't you?
Yeah,
When we did that because with the rye law releases and stuff, they're big on obviously rye releases on. They're
Yeah.
making rye and single malt in the distillery. So, I mean, everyone who's listened will know how well Angus
Exactly,
did in the
exactly. Good
in the
discussion
grain versus malt. It'll be good. But we have to say, the King Lassie Raw exclusive. Raw is one of their brands. Both 8-year-old.
Heavily peated Fife barley.
Absolutely. Available through the Whisky Exchange. I think you can get that exclusive for a month, and you can also go up to Royal Mile Whiskies and get their King Lassie double maturation. Which was your favourite, Ross?
Double maturation for me. But heavily peated whiskey is challenging for my inexperienced and immature palate. But we'll get there.
We're getting there. I enjoyed myself.
Aye,
Yeah.
I like the raw. I really did.
So,
Yeah.
well, let us know if you enjoyed that episode.
Fife barley,
Fife barley, arguably the best barley in Scotland.
I'm an East Lothian bar. What can you do?
But anyway, guys, look, we are joined by some fantastic guests, and I have to say, Angus, we talked about we came here for the Distillers Fair.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
was it before New Year or after New Year?
I think it was before New Year. I think it must have been 30th of December.
If I remember correctly, I had to have about 5
New Year.
Gaviscon before I came. I knew after Christmas indulgence, I was like, if I'm going to a whiskey fair, I'm going to have to do that. But we both said when we did the tour, we
did.
both said the last time we were probably here was a school trip.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
I'm pretty sure at least 2 of our guests will have been working here all those years ago.
Oh,
when we were on that school trip. But it's absolutely fantastic. We've got Susan Morrison, Lenka, Whyles, and Angela Dineen. Welcome along to the Whiskey Stories podcast. Susan, how are you?
I'm very well, and I now feel very old. Thank you.
It wasn't that long ago. You're looking at Angus thinking, God, that must have been about 30 odd years ago. Angus is only 26 years old. You know that?
I've worked here longer than that.
But yeah, it's great to thank you so much. You're the top brass here, aren't you?
Not sure about it. Cheers. I sometimes think I'm at the bottom.
But it's no, I mean, honestly, thank you so much for inviting us along. Thank you so much for having us here. It's fantastic. As I say, Angus and I have enjoyed the Scotch Whisky Experience conversations that we've had with guests.
Yeah.
Many of the guests that you'll probably have worked with and maybe trained up as well. And also we've enjoyed the hospitality that you've given us. We've got some great drams on the table. It's great to be here. So what's it been like for yourself working? Is it a busy time just now? You've been busy today?
I've actually been off sick today, so that's not a question from me. I came rushing up, especially for this. But we are getting busier now. I have to say, this year's challenging.
Right.
And I think it's challenging generally for tourism, particularly in Edinburgh,
Sure.
which is becoming quite an expensive city.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, 2023 bumper year, so busy.
Right.
Don't think we'd ever seen the like. I think that was a big bounce back after COVID. And last year was good too. So it'll be interesting to see where things go this year. But I think globally, obviously, the situation is a little bit uncertain, and business doesn't like uncertainty, and neither do tourists. So,
well, but I mean, I took the challenge of walking up the Royal Mile this afternoon to get here with 2 big bags on my shoulders, and I was bumping through selfie takers, and I was actually guilty of it myself, to be honest. Watch our TikTok channel and you'll see. But you know, Edinburgh does seem busy, and then walk through the door, I can still see there are people arriving for their tours to go around and things like that. So, you know, for people who are coming to Edinburgh, when they're coming to Scotland, one of the things we talk a lot about, Ross, is the fact that, you know, when you're a tourist, you're coming to Scotland, whiskey's on your map, isn't it?
We've known that for years, that whisky is on the tick list
Yeah.
for, in particular, the international visitors. You know, it's synonymous with Scotland. So, you know, one of the reasons we were set up all those years ago was because there wasn't really anything in Edinburgh, and only 20% of visitors went further north than Stirling.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is something I mentioned before we started recording. I didn't actually realise. I mean, I've lived and born in Edinburgh and a year before you actually opened. And of course, I can't remember. Well, no, I'm 26.
You're 26.
Exactly, yeah.
You're not long out of school.
No. Well, I'm actually 35. I was born in 1989, so you opened in 1988, so a year before. Now, I obviously can't remember a time of you not being here, but I could have sworn you hadn't been around that long. So one thing really interesting we should explain about Scotch Whisky Experience is owned by collectively the whole Scotch Whisky industry as a whole. So all these different companies came together and decided to found this visitor experience in Edinburgh for the purposes.
It's maybe worth just saying.
Yeah.
What's your role within SWE? What's your role within SWE? And then tell us kind of maybe the background of SWE and how it's set up and what it is today.
So I am currently called the Chief Executive, but I've had lots of names over the years. The reason we were set up was really just to be a window on the world, so that international visitors got that opportunity to engage with Scotch whisky, because they clearly wanted to, but unbelievably, we didn't have anything in the gateway city for them at all. So it was actually Alistair McIntosh, who was managing director of William Muir's down in Leith, who had come up with the idea, and obviously worked with a lot of the chief execs of the big companies, being a bottler down there. And he said it was like pushing an open door. Everybody was saying, well, why have we not thought of this before?
Yeah.
So really the industry got behind it. And that's something that I love about the whiskey industry. They do get together and work for the greater good in a number of different ways.
Yeah, and we've spoken about this before, as you know, and I think it probably leads us into a question we were going to ask anyway. When we look now, you know, walk out the door and you look down to Princes Street from the Castle Esplanade, you can see the Johnnie Walker Experience, and there's no sharp elbows in the whiskey industry in that sense, from what we've spoken about, because you know you were set up all those years ago, and Johnnie Walker Experience is now this great flagship experience for a particular company, but that's also a company that owns part of this experience as well. And instead, you know, what we've generally found when we've asked this question to people that have worked at SWE or what have you, it's not a case of you two kind of jostling for position. It's a case of you helping each other out, working together, and adding to each other's experience.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think, you know, there's so many visitors to Edinburgh, and our job is to try and engage people, ignite that spark, that beginning of a journey with Scotch whisky. So the more that we have here, the more chance we have of getting more visitors.
It's something we
engaged.
speak about all the time. No sharp elbows in whiskey. Whiskey's a massively important industry, but it's a small industry.
Yeah.
You can get to know everybody if you make the effort to get to know everybody. I think it's maybe worth, before we delve into the challenges of the Scotch Whisky Experience, looking at, for international listeners as well, for Scott Moore, our ambassador out in Tennessee, Scotch Whisky Experience, when it was set up, was it meant to be tours explaining production? Was that the kind of, let's teach people the fundamental, this is Scotch whisky, this is why it's important?
I mean, you had a roller coaster when you first opened.
Disappointed many a child.
Yeah, because the barrel ride has been mentioned quite a lot. Because recently, I think
I left an impression on us.
I think the tour that we did for the Distillers Fair, I think it was like I think you were putting tours on because I think the tour had been completely revamped at this point.
Yeah.
But that was a disappointment for Angus and I, was that we didn't get to sit in the barrel.
But,
so that's the barrel. But I believe every other person that we've spoken to who worked here with the barrel ride, they did say that was one of the most annoying and frustrating things.
I mean, a few people spoke about them being on tour and it would stop halfway and they went, well, okay, well, we need to do this anyway. I thought it was brilliant, by the way. It was a brilliantly entertaining way to learn production.
Yeah, and
however, most people
so the first pressing question is, why did you get rid of the barrel?
Like marketing have hung their hat on the barrel ride for many years.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of the hook. But the point was that the customers that were coming to us knew nothing about whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to engage, but we had to make it fun. It couldn't be boring and dry. It's not the information that somebody who's already an enthusiast wants to know. So we had to deliver the basics, production and blending and all that kind of thing, appreciation in a really fun and entertaining way.
Because even from early days, if you're getting hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of visitors annually, a lot of people that are coming through the doors that we haven't had whiskey before.
Yeah,
so a lecture's the last thing you want to give them, I guess. Yeah.
So because we're not a distillery and we can't show them production, we had to find a way to deliver that. And the ride was actually a very effective way of doing it, taking them round a virtual distillery. And in its early days, it actually took them through the history. So we started off, and I can still remember some of the script, embarrassingly enough. We started off in a crofter's cottage talking about illicit distilling and took them right through to kind of the global position of whiskey today. But then we brought the car ride downstairs and we turned it into a virtual distillery. And it was a great way of delivering production. However, it was the bane of all of our lives. I know, particularly of the guides' lives. Literally, when you were thinking any minute now I'll be pushing this car around the track.
It's such a forward-thinking thing to do back then. Well, I will ask you, Susan, how long have you been here with the Scotch Whisky Experience?
Right. I used to quite happily tell people, and now I'm just marginally embarrassed. So it will be 37 years.
Wow. Amazing. And what was your first role when you came to Scotch
Whisky? I was
a
Saturday tour guide.
Yeah.
So were you here on opening then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not on the actual first day. On the first Saturday they were.
Really?
Yeah.
So in terms of how can you remember how like the excitement, the feeling? Was it a busy time? Were you in and there was a buzz? Because I can imagine that. We're talking 1988, right? So you're looking at, you know, what was the tourism world like in Edinburgh at that point versus, you know, how many people locally were going, there's a new thing opening in Edinburgh, and it'd be quite nice to go and see on
arguably-
Saturday and stuff like that.
Arguably not a great time for Scotch whisky either.
Well, I want to come to that, but
no, it wasn't.
so I mean, can you remember that Saturday when you were in?
Yeah, I remember that Saturday, and you're going to be disappointed because, you know, they had all the opening and they had the industry round, and there was a big buzz obviously around that. But that first Saturday, it was just tourists walking up the mile, because remember, we don't have websites and
of
booking
course.
systems.
Of course.
It was literally people passing. So it wasn't like suddenly people came flooding through the door.
Right.
It was definitely like a slow burn, encouraging people in.
And sitting beside Angus is another person who's been here a fair wee bit. You've got Angela. Dineen, Angela, what's your role here at the Scotch Whisky Experience?
I am the operations director.
Operations director, right. So when did you start working here then?
In December 2002.
So again, you know, you've been here a long, long time. And I think it's really, you know, we've talked a lot about the people that have moved on from the Scotch Whisky Experience, but of all those people that have moved on, you guys will have been part of their journey, and you'll probably remember a lot of them. Do you see them as your sort of flock that have moved on and you've had an impact on their journey?
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure to watch them succeed, move on in the industry, like to think that we've ignited quite a lot of that passion for them in the product, in the industry as a whole. And it's just so lovely. And then to hear them on things like the podcast.
Oh, well, that's the pinnacle for them, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's when you know.
absolutely.
That's when you know one of your ex-employees gets on at the Whiskey Stories podcast. You're
Angela,
like, now they've made it.
One, thank you for listening. Two, please do not encourage him. What was your first role when you joined the Scotch Whisky Experience?
I started as a tour guide.
Yeah.
So I bumped into Susan in my previous role as a seasonal guide at Glenfiddich Distillery, which is what I did before that. So Stwee was on my radar already, and I had a couple of friends working here too. So I came down and was successful in my application. So started as a tour guide, and then quite quickly became Susan's PA, which
Brilliant.
I did enjoy.
What's the worst thing she sent you off to go and get? Did she ever just, I've had a long night and I just need you to get me 2 Solpadine and a double Americano.
I think we all need to remember that Susan is still my boss.
We'll do an episode with you on your own. But,
Again,
you know,
please do not encourage him. And how great is that though? That you've already had the passion in whiskey. You've decided Dufton's fantastic, but perhaps
Absolutely.
let's come down to civilization a little bit, experience Edinburgh.
As a Speyside, I'm taking great offence.
well, I was going to say your accent there.
And then immediately, there's nothing even in the early 2000s, there's nothing in Edinburgh. There's nothing in Edinburgh for Scotch whisky. So, Scotch Whisky Experience, what a fantastic opportunity. To start as a tour guide again shows you've just got this enthusiasm for whisky. You probably, I would say, I don't know if it was on your radar. I guess you'd been at Glenfiddich beforehand, but you know, when you arrive as a Saturday tour guide, I'm going to have a career in whiskey. Of course not. And so it just shows, you know, what a great place and atmosphere it obviously was at that point in your career to make it to where you are now. And it brings us on to our third guest. And also, it's worth saying for people that, because I've told Graham not to mention it, but I will mention it first. We mentioned the Keepers of the Quaich a while ago. We have some real whiskey royalty in this.
we're out of depth tonight.
and the ladies probably hate me saying that, but we've got 3 were Keepers of the Quaich. Susan's now a Master of the Quaich, which again, for people that are new to the podcast, it's basically an award you get nominated by your peers, which I think is really significant, and it's something that gives back and shows and demonstrates the time and the effect and the influence you've had in the Scotch whisky industry. And so I'll hand over to Lenka. Lenka, what do you do at the Scotch Whisky Experience, and how long have you been here?
Well, I've had lots of different titles as Susan, and I can never remember my latest one. Specialist tours. Go on, Angela.
Lenka is our senior specialist tour and tasting manager.
Yeah, you know,
Monitor.
manager. Yeah. No, I started here the year you were born, Angus, 1999.
1989, I was born. So
I am 99.
Okay. So yeah, I started here 26 years ago, and I think what I should mention, all 3 of us here are actually language graduates, because we have always been very keen to employ people who speak languages.
Okay.
We have always had probably the most languages of any visitor attraction in Edinburgh, 20 plus now. including British Sign Language and American Sign Language.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
Good for a YouTube channel. Not so good for a podcast.
Have you ever had a language? I mean, you know, 20 languages. There must be. I mean, obviously, you mentioned British sign language, but it must be a niche language where someone's turned up and has just been astounded that you can offer
Gaelic.
Really?
Yes.
So the one closest to home
Yeah.
is effectively the one that a Gaelic speaker can come here and know that.
Well, we don't have a Gaelic. Do we have still a Gaelic? Or we used to.
Yes. Most of the tour, yes.
Most of
is
the tour,
available
yeah.
in Gaelic, yeah.
Yeah. So we have all the main languages. We have Gaelic as well, sign languages, and yeah, we have a lot of international employees. I started here because of my languages.
And what language is it? Can you speak, or could you speak before you joined? What were languages?
what languages do you put you can speak on your CV? Yeah.
So I'm from the Czech Republic, as you can probably tell. Not a very Scottish accent, even though I've been here half my life now.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of half and half. But I studied English and Spanish at the university in Olomouc in Czech Republic. And I was born behind the wrong side of the Iron Curtain, so Russian was one of my languages. And I studied Polish and Portuguese for a bit as well. So small country, we
And
learn languages.
when somebody from Fife or Aberdeen came down, you went, I've never heard that language.
There's still some people who work here who I have to really focus.
Now, what's very interesting about yourself, Lenka, and I mentioned it before, I was kind of winding you up, is you were nominated twice by our listeners as a guest that they would like to have on. I tagged you in those posts, you never got back to me. But you're here. And one of the things that I was told, Ross's dad, Bobby Bart, he actually, and I think it was maybe Vicky Elliott might have done, apologies if I've got that wrong. But one of the things, whoever it was that tagged you said your knowledge on sherry.
Yeah.
And I believe that you are very, very into your sherry and how that all works.
Last year I became a certified sherry educator.
Wow.
I did that in my...
And a certified sherry educator.
It's something that I've always been fascinated by, the symbiosis between the sherry and whiskey industries. As you can imagine, it's 100 years. I mean, I think Fest and Leith is particularly big in sherry imports, particularly Constitution Street. If you go to port houses and sherry houses in Spain and Portugal, you see like the founding document of Coburn is Constitution Street in Leith.
Yeah.
Names like Sandeman, Duff Gordon, William Humbert.
Symington as well.
Yeah, Symington and all these. I was just really fascinated about how that came about, and two big empires. Yeah, I go there every year. I'm actually going
And you got tattoos?
in a month.
You got tattoos as well?
Tattoos, yeah.
So you're not only sherry, you've got a shit, right? What on earth, right? Because I'll be honest.
Because Ross Barr would maybe like one of these as well, I think.
A butt tattoo.
Ross, I got unfairly. I stand my ground with this. I was unfairly christened the sherry tart
Of the podcast.
Oh,
because
really?
I love. Well, my
wrong with that guy.
no, I know. But you've cornered me into an area. But one of the things, entry level whiskey is, you know, a lot of people, I would imagine, maybe people you've maybe come across people, it's like sherry whiskey is a great entry into it. And Glenallachie 15, Glendronach 12, 15s, these heavily Tamdhu,
indulgent,
Tamdhu 10.
yeah.
They were the whiskies that got you into whiskey.
Really, genuinely were. And of course, I talk about this in the podcast after like episode 4, and Ross is like, you're a sherry tart, Graham. And then the way it hit home was maybe 5 or 6 months ago when we really started the Weekend Dram Roll Call on our Facebook group, which I really recommend you get involved in if you're listening and you want to get involved in that. Every Friday, 6:30 p.m. Weekend Dram Roll Call all
People
weekend.
from all over the world.
People all over. And I don't know who this guy is. I've never met him. And he puts up I can't remember what the dram was, very heavy. He said, he just tagged it, perfect for a sherry tart like you, Graham. And I sort of thought, well, that's where the reach is going. People are actually calling me that. But I do love a sherry, but I wouldn't say it's something I know an awful lot about. I definitely don't know enough about it to get tattoos about it. But what is it that draws you into that? What was it that, and what are the tattoos?
Well, I've got my long dress. Wait, let me show you. So these are the symbols for all the main sherry types. I was looking for a T-shirt and I couldn't find one, so I got it.
I love that.
Graham is going to get whiskey glass Scotch whisky on his chest after this.
Absolutely. But so I mean,
I love history. And what I love about whiskey industry is that whichever persuasion you are, so be it a language graduate, chemistry graduate, marketing, you can find your niche. There is something that you can focus on because it's such a big area, and I'm constantly learning. I feel like I'm novice all the time. But the historical part really intrigued me. The fact I live in Leith, and Angela as well, and you walk around Leith, you see these big warehouses, and when you go to Jerez and Porto, you see the names, and and so you read more, listen to podcasts.
I think it says so much that even after your career in whiskey, still having your career in whiskey, the more and more you learn, saying I still feel like a novice, because the more you learn, the more you realise, oh my God, there's so much to learn.
Well, do you know what?
Actually, Bobby Barr mentioned to me, not only is Lenka's fortified wine knowledge fantastic, but said that one of the most impressive whiskey knowledge he's ever come across. And again, as soon as you say, I've still got lots to learn, or blah, 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 that's when you know they know a lot about whiskey, because it shows an interest. And obviously you're training all these new starts, you're training people that have been here for a long time, new scripts, new tours. So your enthusiasm, you then get to share, which must be so satisfying.
It's brilliant.
I always found that doing whiskey tastings, for example, people are asking me questions on stuff that I would love to tell them about.
Yeah.
So that I already want to tell them. I'm just waiting for them to ask me almost.
Well, it's really interesting.
Opportunity for you to see reviews coming in and people develop and get internally promoted, etc. Your passion becomes their passion.
Well, I want to, because one of the questions I used to before we started the podcast, and it was funny because I remember I did a deep dive into whiskey when I was during lockdown, and so many people did. I like to dram, but I didn't know an awful lot about it. So I read this very cynical article, and I can't remember where I read it, and I just thought I'm going to cling to that, right? Because it's another little bit nugget of knowledge, and it was about the sherry cask. And I actually wrote up in our newsletter. We recently published a newsletter after our Pintail episode, a good few weeks ago now. But it was about, is the sherry cask? And I remember reading this article, and it was all about how a sherry cask is effectively, a cask from a bodega should be seen as a sherry cask. I think it was 1986. You'll be able to tell me was when they stopped exporting sherry in cask format. Everything had to be bottled and then sent out. So effectively, that was the cynical article that I read, was people saying they're not sherry casks, they're sherry seasoned casks. And the industry has to do a lot better to make sure people are aware that it's sherry seasoned.
They have never been sherry seasoned cask, ever. It was always transportation casks that we got here. So
because it'd be interesting to know, and I can't remember what the episode was, we talked about this, was a cask from a bodega would be it's like hen's teeth. Now, there will be distilleries in Scotland.
Richard Patterson can get his hands on a bodega cask. Yes.
Because there will be distilleries that have
very rare
bodega casks, so they can say this is because it's come from. But as you'll know with the history of sherry, the bodega cask in a bodega Solera system, that cask might have been there for hundreds of years. 200 years.
Some of them, yeah.
So they're not going to pass that up, are they? But this is where, when you look at whiskey now and you're seeing these, they're sherry seasoned casks that are coming. And how long has the sherry been in these casks before they're sent over? For some of them, do they have a
minimum 2 years?
Right, 2 years.
The Consejo have now trademark sherry cask in 2015.
Okay.
So the wine has to be minimum 2 years old. You can pay for older.
Yeah.
And you can have it in for longer than 2 years. Yeah. And some people do it, but it will cost you.
But the sherry really is the icing on the cake.
Yes.
Because it's the wood. It's
that's right.
Wood, Quaich Robar, that is contributing a lot of the flavour.
Yeah.
So sometimes people get a bit distracted
by
the sherry.
Yeah, we've talked about the Mark Thompson podcast, the Mark Thompson tasting that we went to, and it was a Glenfiddich one, and he had everyone here. It was colour of this. And he had everyone, and to the point where there was people in the room arguing whether it was Pedro Jimenez or Oloroso, and then he dropped the bombshell. Says that's European Virgin.
I was working that night, and he says, "I've got a cask sample for you. Stick your nose in that," and I'll go, "That's not just sherry, that's PX." I think that's because it was so dark.
Yep.
And everybody in the room said, "Well, obviously that's sherry," and it was just virgin European oak, and It had this. It did have spice that you'd expect from virgin oak, but it still had the spice that you would expect maybe from really high quality sherry cask. So it just goes to show you that the oak
and it's fascinating.
And that was, I heard, if it's a poor quality cask, no matter the quality of sherry that's been in it previously, it's
crap wood,
You know, if it's a high quality oak cask, then you're going to get flavour.
Yeah, and as I say, it is the icing on the cake, and we try to make sure that our guides actually talk about that. They talk about the wood.
Yeah.
And the bourbon and the sherry, but the fact that the wood is contributing a lot.
We've had a lot of new distilleries on recently, and maybe people that are playing around with their distillate style, playing around with yeast, barley, fermentation times, and trying to move that needle a little bit and say, okay, we want distillery character as well. And it is something that when people come to learn about whiskey for the first time, if you wanted a whiskey to taste a certain way, you could do that with cask, but we're seeing more and more distilleries now going, well, this is what we've got going for us. We should introduce the drams we've got, because we've spoken a bit about sherry. Lenka has very, very generously brought us a dram along. What did you bring along to share with us?
So you were asking what 3 drams, yeah?
No,
okay.
You brought us here.
What about, so this is I thought we should have something special from leftover tasting. I did last year, and it is Royal Brackla, 21 years old.
Wow. Angus, how do you say that?
Royal Brackla. Yeah.
Shout out to Sean.
So this is Oloroso, Palo Cortado, and Pedro Jimenez.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anytime you have any other tastings where you have leftover stock, give us a shout, Lenka, because we'd happily have that. Lovely. Now,
I mean, if we're talking about the drams in front of us,
we've been up in the Amber Bar, which we've not mentioned yet. So this is not just a tour. This is not somebody just come for a tour.
It's a very strange looking dram you've got in front of you.
It is. So, a fantastic restaurant just above us, and whiskey bar. It's one of the unknown. As somebody who's lived in Edinburgh for the last 6-7 years, this was always a great spot to go to the Amber Bar.
It was like 450 bottles of whiskey.
It was a hidden gem. I don't know why.
We talked about it. I think it was a Cody Reynolds episode where I said about I and I've said this to you guys before we start, so you're not shocked and you're not going to chuck me out. But I said about, like, you know, the impression that I always had on the Royal Mile, and particularly a place like
next to the castle,
was a tourist trap. Right, and you know, you'll go in there and it'll be a fortune, and you'll get, you know, it'll be that's it.
Exactly.
And, you know, and
until you actually went and experienced it.
Well, no, and you guys pulled me up. You pulled me up on it on the podcast. Said that it's far from that, you know, and because, and then the explanation about the fact.
I actually think the Amber Bar is one of the best value bars.
100%
has been for a long time.
Absolutely, went in for a dram, had a dram at Glen Scotia,
double cask rum.
Rum, and had it as a highball with a bit of soda water.
In my early days, you could say that I had a slight tendency towards sherry as well.
Yeah.
And I
used to drink sherry.
I remember.
I did. Yeah, it's true. You drank sherry.
That is true.
That's what annoyed me about the fact that you were the one that called me.
But I remember crossing the city, leaving the bar I was in, crossing the city to get a dram of Allardyce from the Amber Bar because it was such good value, and I was 18, 19. I couldn't afford to spend lots, but I wanted an 18-year-old. I said, I want to treat myself, and I thought it was a great spot. That Royal Brackla is an absolute belter.
Brilliant.
Their new bottlings, I think they'd done about 3 or 4 years ago, done the Paolo Cortado 18 and this sherry 21-year-old. Something we mentioned over a year ago was, I don't know who the guests were talking about whiskey liqueurs. I was looking at the whiskey menu, QR code menu, again, forward thinking, inclusive, Aaron Gold. I was like, fan daddy
so
dozy.
for people who are listening and not watching, I'm taking a photo of this. It's not a drama as we would expect it to look like.
17%. It is a whiskey cream liqueur, and I tell you what, it puts a smile on your face when you have it. And I think
it's delightful.
It's absolutely delightful.
I'm a sucker for
I want something whiskey related that makes you happy, and that certainly does it.
Yeah.
Then I've went with a tomato and cask strength. So having recently visited a distillery, again, a distillery characteristic and style that I really like, really long fermentation times. The cask strength is just as it should be. I really like it. Needs a wee bit of water. And I picked a dram for you too.
You picked a dram for me, yeah.
So we were discussing that Scotch Whisky Experience is owned by the industry. And this is where my next question comes from. Because for a long time, it was always official bottlings. And pretty much is still predominantly official bottlings, which was great because you could come and learn all about a distillery, do those vertical tastings. I've got you a Edinburgh, bottled by Signatory, who own Edinburgh, but it is an independent bottling of a distillery, and it is something that you do see in the retail here now as well, undisclosed Orkneys, undisclosed Speysides, That's not something I ever seen in Sweden before, and I wasn't aware it was something that you'd offered. Is it the undisclosed? Is it the signatory partnership?
Yeah, no, and there was a huge boom, obviously, in independent bottling. So there used to be the established Gordon and MacPhail's, and then suddenly there were loads of others. And we want to be inclusive, not exclusive. So as long as they abide by our one rule in that they cannot say on the bottle which distill, because that's confusing for our audience.
Absolutely.
Very confusing. If they start saying this is a Macallan bottled by so-and-so. So as long as it doesn't say that, then we're happy.
Which is brilliant, because you're getting these people, because we all know how serious the labelling, the logistics are.
Hang on a second. So on this dram, it doesn't say Edinburgh.
No. So you have an Edinburgh because they're owned by signatory.
So they can say it.
So that's different.
So that's fine. Yeah.
However, there'd be like an undisclosed Orkney, whatever they put, bracket HP, but it's an undisclosed Orkney. For somebody that's coming in, I'd like something that's sherry, 17-year-old, that fits the market, but you're not confusing it with the two Orkney distilleries and trying to sell the same story.
Three now, Ross.
Now we can educate the public as well on that category of independent bottlers.
Yeah.
So the guides are able to talk about that, and we're reorganising the shop a bit now because we've got so many, so that we have a section that is independent.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's in the shop. That's where I got this T-shirt. Actually, it's a cracking shop, and honestly, a danger.
Good value.
Very, very good value, but also what makes it very dangerous. Normally you end in the shop. I started today in the shop, and I have to say it was what Jake Adcock talked about, the miniature selection, and he said that when he worked here, he sort of said, right, I want to start making my way through these miniatures to try and get, and because I suppose that's a great thing, is having those smaller drams available. There'll be people that come in and go, oh, first of all, suitcase, how many bottles can I actually take back in the suitcase? So if you've got such a massive variety of well-priced miniatures, it's a great wee thing to do.
It's in the retail. Is more generous with blends than any other whiskey retail you're going to find in the capital. So I think it used to always be upstairs. I don't know if it still is, but you used to have people from all over the world. Again, we were speaking about the Indian market earlier this year, talking about the demand and the tariffs, etc., that are already, and so. If you've got your heart set on having a Johnny Walker, well, you can come in and see the brands that you recognise.
Well, what's my second dram?
I'll explain the drams I've got here. So I went for an Oban 2024 special release.
Excellent, special release.
10-year-old, I think, I can't remember, but yeah, really, really nice Oban.
Cask strength.
Cask strength, 58%, I think. Yeah, really, really nice. That kind of Oban, bit of maritime, great. I went for an Angus special next. I've gone for Eden Mill Sherry Cask.
Lovely.
So that's a bottle I acquired when we did our episode up at Eden Mill many moons ago. Now,
shout out to Chris.
I actually haven't opened that bottle yet.
So typical Angus.
This is an Angus special. This is a great chance for me to try that dram without actually having to open.
There's a bit of pipe in there, a bit of funkiness actually. Nice in there.
But what I got for you is... I got you a...
Please remember what you got, Angus.
Bladnica Linta. So, Lowland, peated Lowland malt.
Very nice.
So,
very nice. Thank you.
For, given your love for peat.
Yep.
Favourite dram on the table for me is the
That's really nice.
Yeah. I've got to say, thank you so much for sharing that.
Angela, we've not spoken an awful lot to yourself, so wrestle that microphone off Angus there. One of the great things when we speak to people who are tour guides and I think it stemmed from that Cody Reynolds episode, and other people that we've spoken to, is about approaching whiskey at so many different angles. And Lenka's kind of touched on that. So when you first joined then, what was the angle of whiskey that grabbed you, that you thought, because there's so much. You can talk about the chemistry, you can talk about the science, you can talk about the history, you can talk about cask maturation.
You're a big warehouse man.
Yeah, I love my warehouses. You can talk about all these kind of things. You could flavour, all this kind of stuff. I would imagine as a tour guide it'd be very difficult to try and cover everything, whereas if you hone in on something it makes it a little bit easier to sort of focus on. What was the one thing that really grabbed you about whiskey that made you so excited about being a tour operator, tour guide?
So having started up at Glenfiddich, there was a lot of history around that brand, being set up by William Grant, the connection to the family, the fact it was still in the family. I really like this sense of place as well. Obviously, I've already said I'm originally from Speyside.
Which area of Speyside?
A wee village just outside Elgin, not Elgin, but just outside, called Achart. So, but a lot of my family are from up that way.
And what would be the closest distillery that you grew up beside then?
It would have been Glenmurray, but my grandparents stayed at Tomnabent, so my granda worked at Benrinnes Distillery, so they were basically part of the distillery cottages there. So spent a lot of time in and around Aberlour, Craigellachie as well. So a lot of that side of the family work in the whisky industry as well. I think coming down to Swee, I was a bit overwhelmed, having worked for a company that just, we were only really speaking about Glenfiddich and Balvenie up there in Dufton. So coming here and realising there were like hundreds of other brands that I had to get my head around was quite a thought to begin with. But I loved the production process because I kind of knew it inside out, did 5 seasons at Glenfiddich. So I was confident with that, but I think it was the history side, the people and the stories behind it. That's just what captures my attention.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I'm very similar. Like I'm a romanticist. I love the stories. I love all that. And then you meet someone like Jake Adcock, and I couldn't care less about that.
Yeah,
I'm all about
sensory,
science, production. I'm like, I want to know all about how that works.
Well, that being said, at the weekend I had a couple of my pals from uni up in Stonehaven, and we went to Fettercairn Distillery, and that was my 73rd distillery that I bagged. Wow. And some of the questions I was asking as a language student had my engineering pals going, when did you become an engineer? What are you interested in this for? And I'm like, it's all these wee things that make the difference. Like, they couldn't believe how excited I was getting about a copper coil cooling system.
Aye, it does. It gets people, it's copper contact. It's a thing that people just get really, really excited about, isn't it?
So knowing you've been to 73 distilleries, have you got a favourite?
No,
you can tell us what the camera.
Instead of saying a favourite distillery, a favourite tour, you could, because obviously Swee's the best tour in Scotland. But what would be your favourite distillery tour?
Well, obviously Glenfiddich has a big place in my heart, but I loved, as a Glenfiddich tour guide, I loved going down to Balvenie and going around the Maltons and getting to show people
about Balvenie as well. I thought it was Mocket. It was a proper working distillery.
Listen, confessions, I was also a cleaner at Balvenie Distillery. So I wasn't involved in the actual cleaning of the distillery, it was the offices, but
offices were
immaculate.
Absolutely, I was just thinking that. But I used to think, so it was basically doing all the work for Kinenvy as well. I remember going in for the first time and not even really knowing about Kinenvy and going, this is not what I thought Balvenie would be like paper signs about this one, wash back for Kinenvy, wash back for Balvenie, doing all that work was really interesting.
But is there a distillery you're desperate to visit? Is there one you need to tick off?
That's a good question.
Have you got one that you're just...
That's a good question for all three of you.
Jumping to get to.
So I'm really excited because one of the big ones for me that I've not been to yet is actually Glenord, and we're going up there next month. So I'm quite excited to pick that one off.
Is that part of the job, effectively, is the fact that you have to learn about all the... Do you have to actively learn about new all distilleries or as many distilleries as possible? Find the quirkiness, find the differences, so you can say, because we do have people on the podcast. Again, I'm not going to even try and name them, but I think it was Fraser Souness tried to say in the Facebook group how many distilleries use worm tub condensers.
Yeah.
And things. So being able to know that it's maybe. Some distilleries have both,
Yeah, I think for me, it's just that connection with the brand and being able to picture myself at the distillery when I'm then talking about the whiskey, be it in a tasting or teaching the team. There's loads of stuff that you can just share about it.
Yeah.
And with our visitors, it just adds like another level of authenticity that, you can picture that, you can describe it in detail, and like... you mentioned Tomatin. Like, one of the things I loved about Tomatin was the immaculate wiring around the distillery. Someone really took their time putting that in place, and it's just, there's daft wee things you remember about the places that you go, and it is the same process that they're going through, same ingredients, but the variety that comes out of it, and just it's the passion of the people, like meeting the people who are actually making the product is just so lovely. And again, that sense of place, the the part it plays in the local community, how, you know, especially in these rural areas, you know, like it's such a big thing for the community.
So
up
this is
there.
a question for Lenka and yourself maybe then, right? So let's just say a plucky Angus. He says, first year university student, he's got a big mop head, he's a bit dopey, he's walking around, he's come in here and you've said, you know what, we're going to give that laddie a chance. He's a university student that needs a job in Edinburgh, we're going to let him work through.
I went to university in Stow.
Aye, but if you were here, if he was here, right, so when if Angus walks through the door and you say, right, he's a guy that we're going to give a bit of seasonal work to, what are you teaching him before you send before you go out? There you go. There's a tour. Take them on the tour. Teach them this. What's the sort of key fundamentals that you guys know? Hit them with that, and hit them with this, and then over the time that you work here, you'll pick up the rest of it.
Listen, every day, like basically our job is to help the world fall in love with Scotch whisky. And that always starts with our team. And it's just the infectious enthusiasm that absolutely everyone in the business has. We focus on getting everyone up and trained on the tour. We get them to shadow other people's tours so they can see how, you know, like they're not all the same. They're unscripted. It's for the team to kind of put their own mark on it, whatever angle they want to go for. I mean, if you've been on the tour, you'll have seen, you know, there's key moments they have to hit. You can't be talking, talking about the lowlands when you've got Isla on the screen, but they do have the freedom to put it into their own words, so they're comfortable with how they do that. But yeah, we get them on I'll pass over to Lenka here, who runs and has been busy doing this today as well. But all three of us have, in our time here, have led the Scotch Whisky Training School, so all of the team go through that, and I'll let Lenka tell you a bit more about the training that we do.
So in my experience, it takes the newbies about 3 months to feel comfortable talking about whiskey. But I was thinking about it today because I taught the Scotch Whisky Training School to some of our new starts. And it's very different to what it used to be like before. These guys all came with love of whiskey already, and they're in their early 20s. There was only one Scottish person. So we are very international, not just in our visitor profile. I think it's 80% international visitors, but quite a lot of international employees here. And we put them through the training school. It's a great day learning about whiskey, all the basic things, doing a tasting, talking about the sensory appreciation, because that's a big one. Production, all the rest. They shadow tours. We take them to a distillery. Used to be Glenkinchie. We now go to Holyrood, Port of Leith. Staff tastings. There was one happening as I was cleaning up Scotch Whisky Training School. There were staff trying different whiskies. They have a buddy. They pass through exams. It's so we have 5 company values, which we came up with together. I remember being in Castle Hill Room before we set out on this big refurbishment program. And these are authenticity, passion, people, learning, excellence and fun.
Lenka, you can't count. That's 6.
Yeah, I'm not a man. See the apple, forget about the fun. Yeah. But for me, learning is number one. I really love how much people learn here and how passionate people become and how they take the newbies under their wing. You know, it's I always think of us as the mycelium for the world of Scotch whisky.
I also think, though, like, a nod to Susan, like having a CEO who's so passionate about training and development. It's just one thing that there's so much commitment, and for Susan to be involved in it, herself and Julie put together that training school, which we're now like running. But you know, it's just that to have someone leading the company with such a passion to develop, you know, the people around her is what makes, I think,
you're getting a wage rise, Angela.
But I have said it is like, I think, you know, that it's the kind of the secret sauce behind Sweet is just that to be so passionate and for everyone looking to just inspire, enthuse those around them. It's just fabulous.
And all 3 of you have now been recognised by the wider industry. It is amazing that you can start as a Saturday tour guide and have an influence on so many people who are visiting and so many people you work with. You paint the picture of a young Angus wanting to learn it. My dad, I think, was 42.
Yeah.
and liked whiskey,
Yeah.
but didn't really know anything about it. Absolutely loved it. I think even like the handbook you used to get, he was like, "This is the best whiskey book I've ever had," and this was the book.
Susan.
This was the book you had to learn to basically be a bit more comfortable to get on tours. And I remember before I started working in whiskey business, I was thinking, yeah, whiskey could be interesting. Him giving me his sweet handbook and said, "Well, listen, that's the best platform to learn from." So I've never worked here, but I've had to do the reading.
Susan, you know, I mean, they're after a wage rise, obviously, talking you up like this. but I have to say, you know, you could go into any business podcast or they'll talk about culture in the workplace, they'll talk about all these things. And one of the key phrases you hear thrown around a lot is like planting trees as an organisation. And I mean that in terms of planting trees with people. So what you're doing is you guys are a great example of that in the sense that you walked in here for the first Saturday and here you are still, and you've worked your way through the organisation to where you are right now. And you then look at the guests that we've had and the people that we've maybe not had, but people within the industry. I mean, how many other people have maybe worked here that have gone on to become keepers of the Quaich?
Yeah.
How many other people have gone on to start working in industry or working in whiskey, creating whiskey? It must be huge, immensely proud, but also like what a great thing that this place has been able to achieve, to be able to have that.
Oh, I know, and I think it's one of the things that keeps all of us here is that kind of pride in seeing, and I think Angela's already said, young team coming in, not really necessarily interested in whiskey, doing degrees in various different things from medicine to history, and then actually deciding they want a career in Scotch whisky. It is hugely rewarding.
And how do you make, because that was the thing, I think you talked about it, Angus, on the episode we did with Cody, was the fact that I can't remember what distillery you'd been to. And you said that the lady that was taking you around, the tour guide.
Interesting enough, this was Bladnock I'd went to.
That was it, yeah.
And I think she had a chemistry background, and so she was very, very interested in explaining, and she explained it very well, the chemistry behind the process of making whiskey. I have to admit, for me, it really flew over my head. Laura, my wife, really quite into chemistry, found it really, really interesting. So, you know, obviously, you know, we've spoken even a little bit on this podcast how some people are interested in history, some people are interested in production, the science of it, and that's obviously a great thing about whiskey as well, is that you can come to it from different areas.
But am I right in saying like the passion that she still has?
Oh, exactly.
Despite you going, I'm not into chemistry, but at the same time,
exactly. People start talking about amylase, I'm going whoa, you know. But you're right. The passion she had kept you engaged. Yeah.
How do you do that, Susan? Like, how do you guys, when people walk through the door? Now, what's very Lenka's talked about already, that people are actually walking through the door in their 20s who are already, and we've mentioned that we live now in the age. I think Paul Main talked about it on the podcast. So he was like, I was a whiskey geek in the 90s, so I had to buy books, and I had to go to really obscure whiskey festivals when. If you went to a whiskey festival in the 90s, you were a bit of an oddball, you know, because you're like, oh, you're going to a stuffy room with guys that probably stunk of BO and walked about, and everyone was talking about, cask types. And back then, you know, you couldn't openly talk about it too much because people were like, God, he's a bit full on with his whiskey. Whereas now, you know, we're seeing the sort of, you know, like I said, we're on TikTok now, and we have people getting involved in our TikTok. And I'm thinking, I'm too old for TikTok, but yeah, there's people on TikTok that are engaging with our content about whiskey.
I think it's kind of what Angela. It's the enthusiasm, isn't it?
Yeah, but how do you do it though? What do you do when someone walks through the door? Do you, first of all, in the interview, do you have to look at someone that could be like, I'm looking at that person, and I'm going, they can be enthusiastic about talk, because. All right, maybe some people are walking in already knowing about whiskey, but there'll be other people that walk through the door going, I need a job. Mm-hmm. Right. So how do you get that person to stand in front of a group of people and go, I love whiskey, even though they've never liked whiskey before?
That's not something we're worried about. At interview, what we're looking for is attitude. We're looking for someone that likes people and wants to speak to people and is genuinely interested in people. We can we know we can ignite that passion in whiskey. It doesn't matter who it is. I can't remember one person that's walked out of here saying, well, I still don't like whiskey. So you know, once we've decided they're going to fit because they like people, they're going to talk to people, they've got that dynamism and, you know, that enthusiasm, we know we can get them hooked on the whiskey.
So if I walked in and said, if I walked into my interview and you said, as a stipulation, Graham, do you like whiskey? And I'm going, yeah, but I'm lying. Or are you comfortable enough for someone to say, I'll be perfectly honest with you?
Absolutely.
Not
Wait,
keen on
ask
a
the
dram.
question. And I think to this day, I don't obviously do so many interviews now, but to this day, I think when they ask the question, they say, this has no relevance or bearing on whether you will get the job or not. We're just interested to know.
So what about yourself then? What brought you into the...
So it was through my languages. I was working at what used to be called the Caledonian Hotel at the weekend as what used to be called a chambermaid. And it was, in my view, slave labour. I had thought I might like a career in hotels. That put me absolutely off ever working in a hotel. I can tell you now, I remember I got paid £1.98 an hour.
Really?
And it was like a full 8-hour shift, no lunch break.
God.
So my mother spotted an advert in the paper for the Scotch Whisky Heritage Centre, as it was then called. It was about to open and they were recruiting, and I was going to Edinburgh Uni to do languages. And my mum's like, well, look, you could get rid of that job and that would be a good job. You could use your languages. So I applied at that point. So it was purely as a means to use my languages and meet international visitors. But very quickly, and it was great because we're owned by the industry, you met all these amazing people, Jim McEwen, Richard Patterson.
Well, that's it. Your board is just a who's who of incredible people.
And they were all so generous with their time and information.
And were you a whiskey drinker before?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. My dad had a cabinet that had some whiskey in it, but that was my only experience.
Because like I say, again, I'm not going to labour the point, but we're going back to the 80s. And
yeah, okay.
but as I say, like whiskey, like so, I've talked about it on the podcast.
Laboured the point a wee bit.
I've talked on this podcast before. Like my dad worked in whiskey and hated whiskey, right? And
his father owned the maltings, though. I mean,
but he said I hated whiskey. And then he talked about distilleries, and he's like, you've been and again, through the time that he was working there, you're talking about 1985 to 1988. And he's saying, been to one distillery, you've been to them all, right? You've got a boring guy talking about a boring procedure that he found completely null and void.
And that was your attitude for some time.
It was, because I took that attitude and going, yeah, whiskey's whiskey, right? It's three ingredients, same process. How can it be interesting? And there will have been a point, and you maybe know this point because of the industry that you're like, where you're working between tourism and that, where whiskey realised, get your act together, because actually, as well as being a product that people can drink and a product that we can export around the world, it's also a product that we can bring people to. Yeah. Stuart Dick talks about Torrevieja. Yeah. We talk again, sharp elbows. I'm saying to him, I bet you Torrevieja are bricking it, because Skye now having two distilleries, Diageo being like, no, this island's only big enough for one of us, pal. Sort of thing. And he said, no, because guess what? Skye's loving it. Because now people are saying, if you're going to come to Skye, you might spend an extra night. Because now, instead of going to Talisker, you're going to go to Torrevieja. And guess what now? You might do Talisker, Torrevieja and Rassay. And suddenly everyone's going, that's 3 extra days people are going to spend. So did you see in your period of time when that moment was, when the industry kind of said, hang on a minute, let's get this right and let's really hit it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started around the time we opened, because we were closely followed by Glenkinchie having a visitor centre. Glenfiddich had already had one, but it was kind of out of reach at that time for many visitors just because of the transport network. Yeah. So it was about that time that it started to roll. And then give it 10 years more, there was a real flurry for opening visitor centres. And they were the brilliant thing was they all hooked on something different. Yeah. And the best way to learn about whiskey, I think, as Angela mentioned, is to visit the distilleries, because it cements something unique in your head about that particular distillery.
Or stick a big piano on the floor. And they had it what was it, the Grouse Experience. And you used to be able to jump on the piano and do that.
Yeah. That's a good time to ask, because we asked Angela, what's the distillery you want to visit, Susan, that you've not visited?
I've visited quite a lot as well, and so it's probably
over 70.
Yeah, nearer 80 actually.
Oh.
Yeah, we keep a running total. I need to go back and look at mine, but it's probably the newer ones.
Yeah.
So the newer ones that are open that I've not had the chance to visit. So we run twice a year. We host and chair the Distillery Visitor Centre Managers Forum, and it gives us the opportunity. We move it round so that it's fair and equitable for everybody. The people that attend love it because not only are we all sharing intel in terms of tourism and visitors and products and problems and toilets and all the boring stuff as well, but we also take it as a learning journey. We get the opportunity to tour around that distillery.
Yeah.
The poor guide that has to take us all round.
I remember feeling incredibly jealous of some of your stuff because you used to go to North British.
Yes, because we
occasionally.
still do that.
And that's something that, again, even people in the industry, grain distilleries, just go, well, why would you go around a grain distillery? I've been in whiskey long enough to be like, I really want to go around grain distilleries.
Yeah.
No, it's great. North British are fantastic, and they give us that opportunities to take the staff who've not been down
Yeah.
in an evening usually to go round. And sometimes actually, not that long ago, it was Michelle Pizzi that was the operations director, and she had worked here. So she took them
amazing.
round,
That's
and at the
amazing.
end she said, my career started at Scotch Whisky Experience. So that's just so good, and it's so motivating.
So
for the
what would be one of the new distilleries for you? And Lenka, what distillery are you desperate to visit?
So you've had Justine from Cask Whisky on the podcast.
Yes. Twice.
Yeah. So she started in lockdown this Edinburgh Whiskey group, and I've been visiting distilleries with them. I think the new ones are interesting. We actually went to England in our last outing, and did you know there's 55 whiskey distilleries in England?
I know.
Yeah, so we visited.
Shout to Lance Morgan. Big fan. Yeah.
Really interesting setups. Don't know.
We'll put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll go anyway.
One with a sherry cask.
It's a question for you, Susan, as well. Is that we talked about new distilleries, new independent distilleries. Now you're owned by the industry, and that's primarily the older companies that have been in the industry for a long, long time. How do you engage with new independent distilleries about, or do they approach you talking about bottles in your shop, bottles behind the bar? Because obviously there is that, we've talked about it with independent bottlers moving with the times, and the state of the whiskey industry in Scotland changing.
And I think it's also because through actually the Scotch Whisky Experience or the Heritage Centre as it was before, it wasn't maybe that easy because you didn't have all the distilleries on board straight away. There'd be some distilleries now, independent distilleries who aren't part of the setup here. So a new distillery starts. Do you approach them? Do they approach you? How does that?
So I mean, our strategy is to, and it's really an Angela and I job description to approach new distilleries just to let them know we exist. Because really until they've got mature malt, they're not really going to become part of us because there's cost involved in that. But having said that, because Angela and I are very busy. Having said that, we sometimes fail in terms of the distiller comes to us first.
Okay.
So I think because now we're kind of known in the industry, it is great, and it saves us a lot of hassle when they come to us first, and we're delighted.
And some massive success stories for distilleries. It might not be particularly big in production. I think of Glen Scotia, for example. When you do, I think I've done the standard tour here 6 times.
Really?
Yeah. And it's amazing.
He'll claim that as he's worked here. Still on his CV. Did the Sweet tour over 6 times.
Yeah. If you haven't been before, this is where you should come. If you want to understand, first and foremost, it's the most beautiful video on the regions of Scotland you've ever seen in your entire life. But learning about the fundamental historic interpretations of whiskey regions. I don't think I'd ever had a Campbelltown before. I think the first Campbelltown whiskey I ever had was in here, and that Campbelltown whiskey was the only Campbelltown distillery that was part of Scotch Whisky Experience, and I was sold on the brand, having experienced it here, and I've been buying whiskey from Glen Scotia since then. So it is really interesting, even though Glen Scotia are a very established distillery, 1832 or 1826, whatever it is. It's not a big brand globally necessarily, so it's amazing the impact it can have. And looking at the bar upstairs, we're looking at Bladnoch, we're looking at what to pull Graham. I think there's a lot of new distilleries, Linder's Abbey Selection,
Edenville.
It's distilleries that I have not visited yet, But I can come here and I can do that kind of core range and get to discover the distillery.
But it must make a lot of sense now. We're living in the age of new distilleries, and you guys will have seen that change. Yeah, and I think you mentioned that. I don't know whether when we started talking about, many years ago when this place started, was people didn't go north of Stirling.
Yeah.
And now, and of course, the great thing is you don't have to go north of Stirling now to enjoy in Edinburgh. You can stay in Edinburgh. You can say,
You don't even have to go to East Lothian.
yeah, yeah, because up until 5 years ago,
Yeah.
longer than that, I don't know. You would have, if you were in Edinburgh, Glenkinchie was the place to go. Whereas now,
That's just so funny that when I was there, it still has the Edinburgh malt
Yeah.
on the bottle, and then we've got all these distilleries.
but then and then you look at, like I say, we talked about externally. The Fife now. You mentioned Linders Abbey. You've got all these different areas. So somebody can fly into Edinburgh, and Angela, you'd mentioned about up to Speyside. Now, look, we're terrible in this country for saying like a 2.5 hour drive's miles away. You'll get Australians that'll say, I've got to drive 2.5 hours to meet a neighbour.
Yeah, like we've had Canadian team here before, and like they're laughing, you know, at like the distances we're saying they have to
Scott
travel.
Moore. Well, literally, he said. So
drive across state lines.
a listener we've got in Memphis,
He's
Memphis, and he said that 3 hours to cross state lines to go to a liquor store.
There's all different options.
Because a different importer goes into that liquor store in that area, so he knows, and he also does his old dusty hunting where he'll try and find old bottles at the back of shelves. But yeah, even at that though, if you're here for 5 days as a tourist, an American, it's maybe in Scotland for 5 days, and we're across to Ireland, and we're down to England, and we're flying home. We're in Edinburgh. Maybe it is a day to go all the way up to distillery. Now you can say, listen, you can stay in Edinburgh, go to 2 or 3, or you can. And do you see that people walk in, sort of not really that keen on whiskey, or maybe we might as well do it. We'll do the Edinburgh tour, and suddenly they come in and go, right, where can I go now to find? I want a distillery now because I've done this experience.
Yeah, and I think again that's something that's kept us here this long. That people come in just ticking off that I did something with Scotch whisky when I was in Scotland, and by the time they finish the tour and they're speaking to the bar staff, that often what they're saying is, we're only here for like 2 days, but we're already planning coming back, and we're going to go further north. And where should we go?
And tourist attraction, not just a whiskey attraction.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so the numbers, I don't know if this is what somebody goes, but the numbers of visitors from.
How many people do you normally, on average, in a year, would you get through the door?
What's your targets for an annual footfall in a place like
So footfall, actually round the tour, about 225,000. But footfall of people engaging with us within the business, so taking that 225 out, it's about 400,000.
Wow.
From all over the world.
From all over the world, 70% international. Biggest market is the US. But pre-COVID was closely followed by China, and China's coming back up again.
Yeah, Asian tourism is all 12 months now in Edinburgh, which has been a change since before COVID.
I want to speak about some. We've talked a lot
about the tours, because we didn't really go into it.
All right, okay, we'll talk about the tours.
I've said I've done the standard tour many times, and we've spoken about this being a great introduction to Scotch whisky. But Lenka, you can be really into your whisky and come here and get some really interesting tours. What tours do you actually offer here, and what do the tours entail?
So we have the 3 basics: silver, gold, and platinum. They run every day, all the time. And then the higher specialist tours experiences that I look after are tastings. We have blend your own whiskey experience that Susan designed how long ago? 10 years now?
It was on a birthday, wasn't it? Of us and Asva, because it's
2018. Well, we've been running it before then. I think it must have come in.
I remember we launched it at
maybe?
the Old Course Hotel.
Really?
With the Association of Scottish Visitor Attractions. So we had all these attractions. So there was about, 300 people there for dinner. We're all sitting. So we were doing the entertainment pre-dinner, and we were launching this Blend Your Own. Honestly, I was cursing it because I had a team of about 8. It took us forever to set up all the equipment.
Yeah.
All these people, the hotel staff hated us because we were messing up all the settings. on their
So
table.
what, they were all, so did they all have samples on their table?
Yeah, we had, and they were bottles and measuring cylinders.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
The works. However, we knew it was going to work because I have never seen adults so excited about mixing a few whiskies together and sticking a label on a bottle.
It's brilliant. It's very popular with the French market. I've got quite a lot of big bookings for French groups because you get to take away your unique small bottle, and it's hands-on, and it's a lot about sensory.
Yeah.
We have an experience called Tasting Tales where we mix food and whiskey and storytelling. Just basically anything to engage people in the stories and in the sensory part of tasting, nosing. I find that people are completely present in the moment when they're doing that. They're not taking pictures. They're not doing recording. They're not, they're just talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And the best thing about it is also if you get strangers together in a group like that, the friendship, the camaraderie, and the engagement, and the memories, created memories. Is another one of our jobs.
Yeah. Well, I guess we were actually at a tasting. Greg Urquhart hosted a tasting that we were at where we did a blending session, and what was very interesting about that was, and I'll be interested to find out from you guys as well, because you're saying about people that come through the door. Are they whiskey enthusiasts or are they tourists that are coming in? Because in Scotland we have a very probably bad reputation for people who drink whiskey. Well, first of all, the one we hear a lot of, blends are naked. Blends are crap because single malt's a way to go. Blended whiskey is rubbish and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. Like there was interpretations that you build up through other people that you hear from, and yeah, I must admit, I used to think blends didn't do it for me because I was going, why would you have a blend when you can have a single malt? Then you do and that evening that we were at was all people who were whiskey drinkers, and it was a surprise. So they came along to tasting. They didn't realise that part of the tasting that they would get to do is, by the way, halfway through this tasting, you're going to all get to blend, and we'll bottle this. And there was a few guys in there that were, because again, Greg kind of set up nicely talking about blends. You got guys being like, blends aren't any good. Single malt's the way to go, and it was a blended malt that we put together. And it was fascinating because Greg mentioned on the podcast over a year ago, making flavour. That's what you get to do when you're
it's a science, yeah.
But not just a science, it's just an enjoyable thing. You can suddenly say, you know what, I am going to blend a whiskey that I like the taste of. It doesn't matter. And Libby Jo from Tomatin, she talked about that with her bottling that she did. Where was it? Was that the Johnny Walker Experience? Yeah. And she said that was one of her 3 jams. She said, unfortunately, there's only one bottle of it, but it was the bottle that I got to blend. And because I got to make a whiskey that I personally absolutely loved because it hit every flavour point, every note that I enjoy.
People would meet Graham from 3 years ago, and he says, "Well, I only drink single malt." And
5 or 6 years ago. 3 years ago, I was a bit more on point.
Somebody's like, single cask or cask strength, and you say, "Well, none of these distilleries would be in business if it wasn't for Ballantyne's and White Mackay that kept their production going." That's building Bobby Barr's collection. I think the bottle he's happiest with so far is a Ballantyne's 17 1980s.
It was Ballantyne's daft on his holiday.
I got it for £40 on auction for a 17-year-old Ballantyne's in the 1980s. I know it's 40%, and I know that if you're really into whiskey, you can criticise that if you choose to criticise that. But that's some liquid history. It's thought-provoking, and it's important. And actually, I've just spoken about the regions and my discovery of Campbelltown in this building. But I think you offer a blend as well. Do you offer a blend as well? And that's tasting experience. And a lot of the tour is about the grain, the malt, showing how blends are made, etc. We've not even spoken about the most glamorous part of the Scotch Whisky Experience, which is this whiskey room, this whiskey collection.
Yeah, how did that come about? Because it was probably one of the highlights of the tour is this room that you go into, and for anyone that has done it or hasn't
I'd love to be locked in that room.
It's an incredible collection. I mean, we went in, Graham and I went.
Well, it's like Deep Sea World, but instead of fish and shark going around you, it's just bottles of whiskey.
But there's a story I told on the very first episode we did about a bottle, a blend I saw in Japan. I'm from Haddington, grew up in Haddington. There's a blended whiskey called Haddington House, and we went in. I said, I'm wondering if it's in this collection. There's a bottle of Haddington House, and sure enough, there it is. So that just shows you the kind of extent.
It was a Brazilian gentleman.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it was Clive Vides who got in touch with us. way back to say that he really wanted his collection to come back to Scotland, and he really wanted people to enjoy it. So he wanted it to be on display to the public. And to be perfectly honest, at the time, there was no way we could have afforded to buy the collection from him and transport it and pay the duty to bring it back into the country, and build a vault to house it. So Diageo stepped in and said, well, look, if we buy it and we transport it and we deal with the duty, if you house it and look after it, then let's do this. So that's what happened. So we have it on a rolling 10-year loan from Diageo.
Oh, how many bottles are in that?
So there are 3,384. 384.
Wow.
3,384.
So it was a good day for the Exchequer when they came back home.
I know. And the thing was, we were, Diageo explained that it was really like a work of art coming back to be a museum piece. And they said it wasn't even worth the paperwork to try and get them to ignore the duty. So they ended up just paying the duty, which was horrific to bring it back in.
And is a chap still alive? Is he still alive and
He
kicking?
actually passed away just a couple of years ago now. Not even that. Just last year.
Last autumn.
Yeah, but he was able to come back. He came twice to see it, didn't he? The first time he saw it, I wish I had thought I should have had Kleenex tissues there, because it was really emotional
I bet.
for him to see it, because he'd had it in his house on wooden shelves. It wasn't behind glass. It wasn't lit particularly well. And then when he came in and saw that, I mean, it's really emotional.
His legacy's there forever now. That whiskey collection.
Yeah, I think it really, he was so pleased, and especially then to meet us and to know that it was going to be looked after.
They're looking after it now.
Meant a lot to him and to his sons to this day.
His son came
his
long
son,
ago.
yeah.
It's the wow moment of the experience, and it's the eureka moment for many people. You give them all that story, all the background. They choose their own whiskey, and then they're in this.
Like even the way the doors open.
And and the thing is, what's nice about
Are there any bottles in that collection that you point out?
Yeah,
You know, or any in that of special significance?
Angela's not in the way. She knows exactly what is it. Well,
Well, yeah, this is 384, which we've all been tasked with cleaning over the last years as well. So it's a real privilege. You think, a cleaning task is usually quite boring, but it's a real honour to get that close to the bottles, to read the stories. Is
there still bottles that you'll walk past and go, God,
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Yeah,
Really?
but it's really interesting because there's ones, because we get that up close to them, like you'll point ones out to the team that they've never seen before. Like there's a collection of about 4 that have got glass animals like blown into the glass of the
Really?
bottle, and like some of the team have never noticed that. There's other stories like, again, like going back to Glenfiddich, there's the Janet Sheed Roberts bottling, and when we worked at the distillery, it was either, I think it might have been our 110th birthday or our 100th birthday, and everyone working at the distillery was gifted a bottle at the time. And one of those are in the collection, but I've also got one of those bottles.
Really?
That's cool.
that's cool. So you can say,
That's
I mean,
to
that's
see that
the
one.
nice thing about that collection is it's not. I mean, there's certainly definitely bottles in there that you're going, never heard or seen that. But there's also plenty of bottles that and I think that's what's quite nice about it is like, there'll be people that have like when I went in there, like Ballantine's holds a special place for me through the family connection. So instantly I'm looking for all the Ballantine's bottles and I'm going, God, that's an old one there and all this kind of stuff. And there'll be loads of people that are same. You've got David Lyons, he'll be looking for the Glengarries, and what's one Chuck Kerr absolutely loves?
He's a big Glen Talkers.
Glen Talkers again, yeah. So
It's your classic one where it's like, I remember that.
Yeah.
It was on my granny's.
that's the other thing. So that's why you can't just walk past it. Because what happens is you'll walk past, you go, God, there's an old Grant's bottle that I can remember seeing in my granddad's, but
Do you know, when we asked the public, so we did a big survey because we were redoing the whole tour at the time, and that was going to be part of it. And we asked the public if they would like to see a large collection of whiskey, and I was absolutely not interested.
Yeah.
But we had a gut feeling that they didn't know what they actually wanted. So we ran with it, took that risk. And I remember as we were, because we placed the collection, and Christine McCafferty, the archivist at Diageo, she came over and we were all in the collection placing it. and the contractors were still working in the gallery area. And up until that point, I mean, we'd been chatty, but every day kind of chatty, never asked about whiskey. But once we started placing that collection and they started seeing bottles, they're like, oh, my granddad had that.
Where's that? Aye.
And and I knew at that point, we all knew it was really going to work.
Yeah.
Because they were not interested in whiskey, but already they were seeing things and they were like, oh, that looks amazing.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
You got a favourite bottle in the collection, Susan?
Okay, I see bottles that I don't think I've seen for ages, but it's when you get industry in there and they're telling the stories behind the bottles that are not on the labels. That's when it gets really interesting.
Richard Patterson come on and been like, I can't believe you've got that limit.
Well, Richard has, and Willie Tate, who used to be.
Do you have to put like rubber sheets on the floor when he's in case he does his swirling around and flings it out?
I have heard a story about your carpet and
I have the most expensive carpet in the world.
We had just laid that carpet, and he was on the board of directors, so he knew what it cost.
Am I right in saying he was on? It was maybe to illustrate our staff training, and you'd warned him, Richard, I've got a new carpet. and am I right? Am I right in saying that one of a young member of staff? This is the way it was told to me, that a young member of staff was part of the training, and he gave the glass to him and said, chuck this out, put that on the carpet. And so this new tour guide's put it on the carpet. and he's
not the way I remember it.
He basically said it wasn't me.
Richard was defiant, and Richard went ahead and threw the whiskey, but I was holding a bucket. So I managed to get some of it, not all of it. And the next morning, Richard appeared with carpet cleaner.
These are the characters, aren't they? Lenka, what's your favourite bottle in Clive's collection?
So I would say I remember a lot of the bottles, the way they tasted. There's a 12-year-old Glenmorangie that was released for the millennium that I bought and opened and drank, as I will all of my bottles.
Quite right.
But I still remember how beautiful that was. And there's a bottle of 18-year-old Grand Reserve Macallan that I also remember how it tasted. It's a bottle of Ardbeg Provenance. That was one of my eureka moments. And I remember that taste. Yeah. It's like liquid poetry.
Yeah.
You don't forget how it made you feel. So, that would be my favourite bottles.
Well, one of the things I want to ask you all, because you've worked in the industry for so long, but also, I mean, it's wrong to have to talk about it, but the stigma of females working in the whiskey industry. And first of all, from your own point of view, Lenka, is that there'll be people that are being like, well, first of all, a lassie, and second of all, a foreign lassie. So how difficult has that been for yourself coming over and, trying to speak about whiskey, and you know so much about it, but yet there will be people out there that go, no, I can't.
I love it.
Yeah, do you?
Yeah, because it's a good challenge. And generally, because, I do love talking about it, but I also quite like people.
Right.
It's never been an issue.
Yeah,
no.
Good.
I mean, the initial reaction, and I must say they are usually Scottish men.
Yeah, because I mean, look, let's be honest, right? We'll talk about him, Big Cameron Ewan. If you were to draw a guy, right, that was a Scotch whisky sort of person, right?
You ask an American to draw a Scotsman.
Yeah, a big gingered guy with a kilt on, right? It comes bounding over to you and says, "How you doing? Want to talk about whiskey? Brilliant." Or I think we slaughtered Mark Thompson on one of the episodes where it was like a guy in a tweed suit sitting by a fire with two pointer spaniels, swirling a dram around with a cigar smoking in the background. Shout out to Mark Thompson. But again, that kind of thing.
Speaks about an old guy saying, "I'll have a Tam de Villain, please, because that's the only whiskey that doesn't put colouring in their whiskey." Yeah. And that's the case that somebody's told him that, and he's then told 100 people that because he believes it to be true. And I think there's just this kind of self-entitlement.
Well, of course, but for you guys, I mean, the industry and the world has changed massively for the better, I would say, from that point of view.
If you look at Scotch whisky now, all the blenders are women.
Well, yeah.
The distillers are women. There's got to be something with it.
No, but, we had... was it Andrew Murphy from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society?
Yes.
And he was talking about he's a gay man, and he was talking openly about the LGBTQ community and whiskey and inclusivity, and how the SMWS are very proactive on that. I'm desperate to go to drag me to the whiskey tasting, a drag
drag
tasting. Yeah, brilliant. But yeah, we did joke that as inclusive as whiskey is, it was Angus, myself, and Andrew said there's still three white men with beards sitting talking about whiskey.
So
but you from the 80s through to now, going through the challenges you'll have had. First of all, starting out as a Saturday tour guide all the way through it. Is it something that you've come across quite a lot?
Yeah, but I would agree with Lenka. I never saw it as a disadvantage. In fact, it was almost an advantage being female. Because once you'd proven to people you knew about whiskey, they were actually far more interested than had it been a Scottish bloke in a film. You know what? Because they were interested in how did you get into whiskey? So it always turned to your advantage. So I wouldn't say... It did mean you had to kind of dig in for 10 minutes until you got their attention. But after that...
You just say, I'm from Speyside, so...
Have you got that?
But that always helps. But no, I think I've been really lucky working at Glenfiddich. Libby Lafferty was in charge of the visitor experience at that time. Absolutely, amazing. And then to come down here, Susan.
Susan
was heading it all up. Working in the DVC side of it with the distillery managers or visitor centre managers, people like Linda Mellis from Diageo, Caroline Mitchell from Chivas. There was just so many women doing great things in whiskey all through the time I've been here.
So that would always have given you the confidence that...
Yeah, it didn't feel like a thing, but I'm still it's really disappointing that I know our team still get that, if there's two of them behind the bar, the question goes to the guy. And it's just, I'm really pleased that we've got such a supportive team here, and the males in our team are really good at kind of ensuring that all the team are involved in that conversation. That's really inclusive.
For a very brief time, and I remember my gentleman saying, I'd like a young man to serve me, and then not being able to answer his question, and then go and answer my question to say, I need to ask Lindsay, she'll know this.
Yeah, I at a tasting over at our hotel in Open, and Ross, who is our head of facilities and IT, had been my chauffeur for the night, and I'd conducted the tasting, and then at the end of the tasting, people were queuing up to speak to Ross and ask him questions, and he's like, I'm our driver, you need to go and speak to her.
Tom and Monique, when they worked at the
whiskey shop in Cadenhead,
whiskey shop, and they both worked together, and they were both, as a couple at the time.
I thought with that it was going to the old Einstein story that one he had a driver, and when he's doing lecture tours of America, and his driver was it's an apocryphal story. His driver was so knowledgeable, and one day he was feeling a bit under the weather, and he said, I can't do this, but I can't let everyone that's come to see me down. And this guy delivered the lecture as part, and at the end there was a Q&A, and someone asked him a very complicated question, and he said, well, that's such an easy question, even my chauffeur will be able to answer this question. And
but yeah, Tom spoke about tourists saying, I'd like a woman's whiskey.
No, well, basically it was an American tourist.
Octomore.
Yeah, well, because they would say, I need something to take back to my wife. What would you recommend as a whiskey for women? And what he was saying was basically his flavour profile. He liked the sweet, the light, easy-going stuff, but Monique, she loved the heavily peated.
She was Octomore
number one. And if you suddenly said, more females, and it'll be interesting because we are going to come to our What 3 Jams. We've had more females talking about peated whiskey in our What 3. We've had more peated whiskies and What 3 Jams from female guests than we've had from male guests. Now, there'll be plenty of people that say, a big, strong peated whiskey pits hairs on your chest, laddie. Something like that. But actually, so it's impossible to actually... No, and I think, as we've seen, and it was Megan Brown.
Megan Brown, yeah.
Who did the feature with BBC about females having a stronger, more likelihood of super tasters. Yeah. And I've said it before about Harper and my wife. She actually has, we update for the podcast listeners, she had the Dalrye Milk North British.
Did she like it?
She finished it this time, so it's the first dram she's fully finished herself. Yes. But she has said, I want to try it, I want to get in. But what would happen beforehand was, I would say, I'd pour a dram, I can't define it.
No things, not your
flavours, I can't do it. I would pour it, I would say, right, I'd get the tasting notes up. I said, go and smell that and tell me what you get. And if there was 5 flavour tasting notes in there, she'd get 3 or 4 of them out of the 5. And I'm going,
It's not very personal as well, but it is. It's one of those things that is.
yeah.
It is amazing.
But we are approaching that time because we have effectively 9 drams to get through it.
And also, we'll say thanks for your. We could do 10 podcasts of you three ladies. To be honest,
Well,
time's got away with us a little bit.
I've offered, if you ever want to invite Angus, Ross, and myself, probably Angus myself. Ross is a bit of a know-it-all, right? No one would be allowed to ask a question on but if you wanted us to, we would happily get Ali Baxter to train us up to deliver a.
I said, if he's qualified to train you,
If he's well, look. The last time Ali was on the podcast, and he was great, a great brand ambassador for the Scotch Whisky Experience. It was a New Year's episode.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it was actually, we recorded that on the day that you guys were doing your Distillers Fair. And he did kind of say, well, look, I'll be doing the Distillers Fair and there's a good chance I might have a dram or 2. I said, no, that's fine. And then he kind of messaged me on Instagram that day with saying, like, listen, I've had a few and we've gone to the pub afterwards. I'm not going to make it for a podcast. So I thought, that's fine. We just turned up. And then Ali Baxter out of nowhere just rocks in. And he triggered the song for Old Lang Syne, singing the bells as well. So
it's also a great time when this comes out. Congratulations, Ali.
Oh, he's just got engaged as well.
Just got engaged.
Yeah.
Felicity, so
well done.
Congratulations to them.
Well done. Yeah, absolutely. So, right, what we're going to do? How are we going to do this? We're going to do 3 drams each, just go around, or we're going to go?
You want to do all 3?
No, we're doing the 3 drams, but we're going to do one dram per person per time. So what we'll do is we'll start with yourself. We'll start with you, Susan. We'll go nice and easy.
Start with CEO.
That's the bit. So, or what 3 drams? Any 3 drams. So we'll get your first one. Then we'll go Angela and Lenka.
Okay, well, you've just talked about women like an Isla, so my first one is an Isla. And we were talking about it earlier, and a lot of what makes dram stand out is where you tasted it and who you were with.
Yes.
So my first one takes me right back to my early days when I was initially learning, lots still am, but Jim McEwen was definitely one of the people that taught me a lot about whiskey, and it was the first time I'd been out on Isla. And I was with Jim, and also I don't know if you know Alan Wardrop, who's now with Ian MacLeod. Alan was there in his early days, so you can imagine there were a few drams. But and Christine Logan, who is now the Lady of the Isles, was at Bowmore at the time, and we were all sitting round a peat fire and we were drinking the 17-year-old Bowmore. It, to this day, is a dram that I hanker after because obviously it's not around anymore. But it was an amazing dram.
Was this within sight of the distillery pretty much? Yeah.
We're in the distillery.
In the distillery.
In the distillery, sitting round a peat fire, just all chatting about the dram, and Jim was
Wonderful.
answering every question you could throw at him, and it was just an amazing experience.
That's
That's a great story.
it is, and
Follow that one up.
from your own point of view as well, like the names you're mentioning, being in the building, in this building at a time when the whole industry was involved, it would have felt like a very exciting time. But you could rattle off name after name of people that in the whiskey industry, people go, that's a legend, a distinguished person in the industry, through them all. And at that time, it must have felt very new and exciting. And to be able to sit, like you said, sitting in the peat fire with these guys.
Yeah, but to this day, I feel so privileged to have met all these people and who so generously share their time and information and enthusiasm, which has, really helped me, and hopefully I've passed on a lot to new team that are this year.
Is there something about the age statement of 17 that sits with people? I've like, so old Pony 17 has featured.
17.
Ardbeg 17, right? I would say. Well, I was actually talking about it yesterday with it was a friend of the podcast, the Ginger Boy Hamish. We were talking about it, and I was saying that a dram that I've not really spoken an awful lot about, but I bought a Glenfarclas 17 on the auctions.
Also discontinued.
But again, I remember drinking that.
Kiss it death.
It was just but I don't know. Is it something that?
I don't think so, Graham.
I just think
But I think that is interesting.
there's a 7 because it's not an age statement that you normally see.
But, well...
Could there be an argument, right? Now, Angus came out with a little bit of...
We've just seen an 8-year-old single malt for the first release.
Of course, absolutely, no, fantastic. But Angus came out with a bit of a cynical argument when Glenallachie changed their branding.
They changed the fonts
And everything like that.
Flintstones
And you sort of remember you said that, is it within a distillery's best interest that when they change their branding, the first batches that come out, they put their really, really good stuff in there. So people will go, I remember that, because it's sort of that reckoning. And is there something with 17?
No,
maybe.
There isn't.
Right,
there isn't
fine.
anything to do with 17. Although I do like the argument of the first batch being the best batch. I bought my dad a Tamdu batch strength 1 maybe a year ago because he spoke about getting it in the Swee shop 10 years ago when they'd just done it, getting it at an amazing price, and Bowmore Tempest as well. Another discontinued whiskey that he said, I think, is it cask strength Bowmore and bourbon, that I think he said that he's got a good staff rate for and that he kind of fell in love with. But no, I don't think 17 is significant.
I'm gonna carry that flag.
But it is
I'm
interesting
playing that
how
flag.
often it comes up.
Yeah.
Angela, what's your first story?
It's funny, we've already mentioned Ali Baxter. We kind of play podcast bingo, the pair of us. So how often will he mention Glenmurray and how often will I mention Glenfiddich and my next dram? So Ali will not be disappointed this evening. So my first one, I've kind of looked at my journey through whiskey, and so I've chosen Benrinnes 15. So I mentioned both my granddad and my uncle worked as mashmen up at Benrinnes Distillery. It was my Granda Craig, but we always called him Granda Ben because they stayed up at the Ben. So that's the whole thing around that. So whenever I have Benrinnes 15, it's just such a strong connection to that side of the family. Also, it's a great whiskey because not many people know about it. So I remember being at a Springsteen concert in Hyde Park and I had it as my hip flash dram and just sharing it with people. And to have people tell me now that they still look out for Benrinnes 15 because it was such a great experience. Like Susan said, where you have it, who you're with, what's going on. And that was just really memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. Hip flash drams are an interesting choice. I was speaking to who
monologue from Graham between these 9 stories.
No, hip flash drams it's an interesting talk about because you got to pick the right dram where if it warms up, it still tastes very, very good. It's there's an art to a hip flash dram. If you're at a wedding all day, right? If you're at a wedding all day, right, and you've got a hip flask and you're maybe keeping it in your chest pocket, that's going to warm up.
Especially if you're doing a Dashing White Sergeant.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially
You're at a Springsteen concert. You're getting big licks, aren't you?
When
Right?
was the last your wedding in India, perhaps? I mean, what do you fill a hip flask for a wedding in India?
We didn't have I had a hip flask, but we also had I've told it on the podcast.
Balblair 15.
Balblair
travel
15.
exclusive.
We had a Glenfiddich travel exclusive. Because we had them behind plants around the hotel.
Because the whiskey was so expensive.
That's what I brought to the table anyway.
I very rarely use a hip flask, but I was meeting up with old school friends about 2 weeks ago, and I opened my first bottle of the Whiskey Stories Blend 25 to meet some old school friends and say, this is a bottle we've done for this.
Only a few of those bottles still available.
Lenka, what's your first story?
Well, I'm going to go back to Isla, like Susan. So this summer, it'll be 30 years I met my husband.
Oh.
And I went back to study in Czech Republic, and he would come and visit me as often as he could. And for some bizarre reason, not being a whiskey drinker, he would always have a bottle of 10-year-old Lafroig with him, which, you could barely get Johnny Walker Red Label in Czechoslovak Socialist Federative Republic then. So I was very intrigued. I can't say I liked it the first time. I remember sitting around in the blocks of flats with my flatmates going, what is this?
Yeah.
But third time, we were all hooked.
Really?
And I actually remember when I came here for an interview in March 1999. And it was Alistair interviewed me for some reason, and he asked me, do you drink any whiskey? I said, Lafroig.
Lafroig.
Yeah. And I really like talking about that whiskey to this day because there's so many cool stories. Bessie Williamson, legend, would love to have her at my fantasy dinner table.
Right.
Then you've got the Prohibition.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know why Mark chose it. It has a strong shelf shout. I only got him into whiskey in lockdown, not very long. But he wasn't
a whiskey drinker, but he would drink that Anytime he came,
Not until COVID.
Yeah. I mean, he would have a dram, but not like actively look for whiskey.
And what was, because obviously, like the Czech Republic are well known for their beer.
Absolutely.
So what's the whiskey scene like over there?
Oh, it's burgeoning. Yeah, there's a lot of whiskey geeks. I know all the big figureheads.
Yeah,
because they've all been here.
they come here and then they all go back and go, right, we're all in on that.
Yeah, they come here to the bar specifically,
Yeah,
and to the Amber restaurant, which is just a fantastic Scottish restaurant, great value. So I know most of them. There are distilleries. There's probably about 10 Czech whiskey distilleries. They have festivals. It's
And is there sort of a go-to flavour profile that you would maybe say that the because it's always interesting, like spoke to Moa Reynolds, who talked about like what the Swedish like, you know, that kind of more meatier, smokier kind of flavour profile. Is there a sort of
old and expensive.
Well, we had a Lefroy 16 Oloroso Sherry barrel from Pintail on our Indie Bottler Spotlight. It was a cracker. Lefroy named, which you don't often get. You wouldn't get in the shop here, would you? As an independent bottler.
That would be an undisclosed barrel.
Exactly. Okay, brilliant. Right, Susan.
So I'm going to go for a blend now. And again, it's about an experience, because when we were about to turn 21 as a business, it was the first time we were allowed to bottle our own whiskey. So we were never, it was always part of the deal, we would never sell our own SWE whiskey because it would compete with the distillers. But as we approached 21, the board had a chat, and we agreed we would bottle up a blend, because that was appropriate for us, and it would come from obviously all of the distillers. And William Grants agreed to do that for us, and they invited myself and Julie, who's currently our marketing director, out to decide what the blend was going to be. Now, we thought we were going out to Strathclyde Park to like maybe try a couple of blends that Brian Kinsman was putting together and then decide which one we wanted. And when we arrived, it was phenomenal. Brian had set up his whole lab.
Wow.
There were about 100 bottles, and he was like, right, tell me what you want in it. So Julian, we spent pretty much the whole day there.
Wow.
And just pulling out whiskies, and he let us put together 3, and we came down to 2, and ultimately the only difference between these 2 was 1% Lefroy.
Interesting.
Really?
1% Lefroy, but it made all the difference. It made the blend deeper. It just gave it more depth and intensity, I suppose. However, we chose the other one because we knew we had to sell it.
Yeah.
I like
So
that.
we went with the other one, but it was so interesting. It was such a great learning experience and such a privilege to be allowed to do that.
And Brian.
And I have to say, the 21-year-old, and I feel arrogant in saying, I mean, Brian had a lot to do with it, but saying it was a fantastic 21-year-old.
So what was that? What was that called then?
It was called the 21-year-old anniversary. The Scotch Whisky Sweet Blend.
We call it the Sweet
We
Blend.
call it the Sweet Blend.
Well, that's easier for me to spell.
Sweet Blend, 21-year-old.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Okay, Angela.
So I feel like maybe the 3 of us should have consulted on this before we did this. But I was meant to go on that trip as well. I was asked to go along on it, but I was being super conscientious and said that my workload was too much. And I regret that to this day. However, in 2009, I got invited to go back up to Glenfiddich Distillery and do a very similar experience with David Stewart. So it was the 40-year anniversary of the visitor centre at the distillery. So they had former guides that were still in the industry were invited back, and although not working for competitors, so that's where I was at an advantage working here. And I remember going back up, and so kind of current team and some of the former team got together, and we got to select a cask, which was then bottled as the anniversary blend, anniversary malt for the DVC there. So that was at Glenfiddich 1975, which I
Not
think
bad,
was, I think it ended up being like a 34-year-old. It was amazing. We tried it on the day. I am very much like Lenka. I don't have a collection of bottles. I buy my whiskey to drink, but I've yet to open that bottle. I'm saving it.
Was it sherry? What was the?
I knew you'd ask me, and I had it looked up on my phone.
Take it back.
It was something. It was a sherry cask finish. But I can't remember. It was like a first fill something or other. But yeah, it was pretty. I will.
I think you're a bit like me. You buy bottles to drink, but you just tend to buy bottles faster than you can drink them. So there's always something that remains, right?
Well, it'll remain unopened because up at my mum and dad's, because none of them drink whiskey, and I don't want to spoil it on the end of a night out when you just bring people back and you don't really appreciate it. It feels like one I want to appreciate.
There's sometimes bottles that I say, sorry, I should. I say that they might not be open now, but I'm waiting for a good reason.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a cracking. I mean, honestly, that's a cracking dram.
No pressure, like.
Okay,
Well,
Lenka.
that's a good lead on, actually, because I once brought my husband here to have a dinner in a restaurant, and that was still looking for that whiskey to have his eureka moment. And I thought he might like this 30-year-old Dalmore Pedro Jimenez finish. It was a special bottling. It was a long time ago because that bottle, I remember, was about £100.
Yeah, so
that's a long time ago.
What PX?
Yeah,
What the
30
30-year-old Dalmore PXL for now? Do you reckon?
he loved it. I spotted in the shop that it was kind of finishing, so I bought two. And
Money well spent back then.
I know, and we decided that we would open one marked 10.50, and we totally forgot about it. And then one day we were eating, and I spotted the bottle. I was like, "You're 50." So we opened it. I mean, we checked how much we could have sold it for, which was a bit of a mistake, but.
And can you tell us, or do you want to tell us?
Oh, it was like £1,000.
Really?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
When you look at that.
But we opened it, and you know what? We had it in the house for over a year. And it was a special dram people got on a special occasion.
Yeah, I like that.
And we had grown men in tears
Really?
as to how beautiful it was. Wow. It's really good to open these special bottles with special people and share those memories, because people still remind us about it.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
It's a nice thing to do, where if you were to measure for over a year, if you were to say, right, on the 1st of January, I'm going to have my first dram out of a very nice bottle, and I'm not going to touch it until I have a nice thing to drink to celebrate. And over the year, you'll be able to walk past and look and go, oh, I'm a quarter of the way through that, and I must, I'm having.
I'm quite a sad year.
Oh, you're going, bloody hell. But then the best thing about it is if you're not having a great time, you're like, right, sod it, it's got to get finished. We've got to drink it.
That's a great
That's
story.
lovely.
I wept when you just told me the price of that.
Aye, that's why grown men are crying over that. Yeah, there'll be podcast listeners crying that you paid £100 for that.
And Susan, your third and final dram.
I've just realised it's another Isla, and that wasn't deliberate. But again, it was about the place and the people. I can't remember where I was over. I think we were doing a whisky school somewhere there. But I got the chance to go up and meet John McClellan up at Bunnahabhain Distillery, and I was sitting in his office, and he's like, "Try this." And it was a 40-year-old Bunnahabhain, and obviously not peaty, as Bunnahabhain traditionally isn't. And it was absolutely phenomenal. And I think it's probably why today one of my go-to drams is the 18-year-old Bunnahabhain. I love it.
So you're putting the 40 down?
I'm putting the 40 down.
I think that's the third.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like this was a sample that Susan was given rather than the official 40. Which
I know, but still,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you're not gonna do what you did to Cam when Susan says Bunnahabhain 40.
Cameron said Bunnahabhain 40 is that's the best dram I've ever had. I said no, it's not. It's not your favourite.
There was an argument on the podcast. Cameron goes, right, so you're telling me what my favourite dram is, and Ross went, yeah, I am.
And it turned out about 3 weeks later, it's like, yeah, actually, you're right. There was a Longmore and all the rest.
Mark Thompson talked about Bunnahabhain 40.
Yeah, but Bunnahabhain 40 would be one of mine.
And a distillery that I'm actually really starting to open up to as well.
Heartbreaking when you go to the distillery and everybody that works here calls it Bunnahabhain, and you've been calling it Bunnahabhain for your entire career. Oh, blah. Tell them I love Bunnahabhain. I'm the same as you. Bunnahabhain 18, fantastic whiskey. Everybody at the distillery where we work on site, Bunnahabhain.
Really?
I'm going there next month, and I'm already upset about it. I can't wait to get there. But yeah,
It's like Royal Braclaw.
Bricklayer. Yeah, terrible. Great
Right.
story. Angela, your
Angela.
third and final.
Right, so we've come from childhood Speyside through to Glenfiddich. So from my time at SWE, one of the favourite things about my job is when we get to go to the Distillery Visitor Centre manager meetings. And my absolute favourites are the ones on the islands. So we did Talisker and Torrevieja and Raasay. That was epic. That was a really good trip. But the most memorable one for me would be up in Orkney, where Patricia Retson was hosting us, and we went for a beautiful meal, and then we got into this minibus and we went up to the top of this hill at the back of Kirkwall, and there was the most gorgeous sunset going down across the islands, and she gave us all a Highland Park 18.
And it was nearly midnight.
It
quite
was,
awful,
yeah, but it was still, yeah.
Okay.
It would have been June time, I think, and just surrounded by like the best group of folk. You know, they are the best meetings that we have. Getting to see so much of Scotland, which
tough
I
job you
love.
guys have.
I know,
Really?
you know,
Must be.
Happens
What?
twice a year. It's not that often.
but they're so memorable, and you're just reminded. You know, like I've got a wee thing up on my desk upstairs that says, "Relax, you're saving PDFs, not lives." You know, just to keep you focused. But actually, you don't really need it, because you're making the world fall in love with Scotch whisky every single day, and it's such an amazing job and such a privilege. But to get moments like that, and just the access we get to the industry in this role, is just phenomenal. I absolutely love what I do. Yeah.
Next time you do one of them, you need a podcast to come and follow you up, right? We'll take the cameras. We'll just Angela's journey. We'll go all the way there. Start from when you wake up in the morning, have your first coffee, to midnight when you're watching the sunset with a Highland. We'll be there to cover the whole thing. That's a feature.
I can only think how much of that you'd be able to actually show or broadcast.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, Lenka.
So I thought I should have an ex-bourbon matured whiskey for my last one as well, just to complete the trilogy. And I would go for, there was a Glenmorangie cellar number 13 a long time ago. Do you remember it?
I do.
It was so beautiful. And I bought a bottle to go to India to visit friends I made here during the festival. And that's one of the things I love about living in Edinburgh and in Scotland, and being plugged into the whiskey industry. You know, everywhere I go, I'm the whiskey linker. So I chose this particular bottle and stayed with a lovely girl called Gayatri and her family, and in Delhi, New Delhi. Yeah. Long time ago, over 20 years ago. And we shared that, shared stories, and I remember that flavour so well, and I felt very privileged to be able to bring that bit of Scotland to them. Whiskey is obviously massive in India.
Yep.
Biggest export market by volume at the moment. And yeah, I'm really fortunate finding this job in a job centre, because it's
Is that this?
in a job centre, yeah.
In a job centre.
In a
Superb.
job centre, I found it. But yeah, it made me I learned about Scotland's history, geography. I made friends through it. It's just been such a privilege.
That's fantastic. No, thank you. Listen, guys, thank you so much for having us. Thank you for sharing your stories.
I don't think we'll have three better ambassadors for Scotland and for Scotch whisky. It's amazing. And what a great podcast! Fantastic stories.
No, honestly.
And the consistent theme of the stories is drinking whiskey with the right people.
Aye, yeah, absolutely. And you know, we can't stress enough, you know, how many people we've already had on the podcast to talk about it. But I think when it boils down, and you mentioned it about whiskey's a people's thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's nice to have a dram on your own, but it's even better to have it when you're surrounded by people, and to be able to you impact so many. You know, the Scotch Whisky Experience impacts so many people. And I'm talking about, all right, every single person who maybe walks through the door will have an impact, but the people that work, you know, you just have to look at the...
Should transform the industry.
You just have to look
certainly for the UK. You look at the UK team of Scotch whisky, it is it's getting a little out of control how many of them have been influenced by,
I know.
by Susan Morrison here.
I know, exactly. The godmother of Scotch Whisky. The fairy godmother.
It is amazing. If people haven't been here before, You're open pretty much every day of the year, right?
Yeah, every day except Christmas Day.
Yeah, don't come on French Rugby Day. That would be my
Yeah, don't
advice.
come on French.
French Rugby Day is the busiest day of the year.
But in terms of so we have a big listenership of people who are probably whiskey drinkers that will say, why would I want to come on a tour to learn about whiskey? Because they might learn about the things they already learn about. But what would you say to the person like myself who would have said, I'm not going to bother going to the Scotch Whisky, it's a tourist trap, or it's this, it's that, and anything. For the people who are listening that go, you know what?
They're already listening to a fairly niche whiskey podcast.
So what different tours? If you say, like, if you don't want to come in and learn about this is what barley is, and this is what, this is the 3 ingredients and all that kind of stuff, what can somebody who is already a fairly seasoned whiskey person that likes their whiskey, what other things have you got available here? Because it's not just for the general tourist that don't really know.
Restaurant, food. Yeah, food is fantastic. Wendy and her team are just amazing. All of our team is very long serving. We're not the only ones.
Yeah, of course.
who have been here for so long. Rose and Bob from the maintenance department started same year as me. Wendy, over 20 years. Julie started.
Yeah, she's over 25.
Also, keep it the Quaich.
Mental,
Yeah.
Wow.
She was the youngest female master of the Quaich, I think. And she's been here for longer than me, so 28 years.
Yeah.
The restaurant is fantastic. The bar, you've already mentioned.
Yeah.
Over 500 different brands, and the team is so passionate.
Blending experience, make your own whiskey experience sounds like a bit of me too.
Like Angela and I, we were going out one night to the theatre. Do you remember? And we thought, let's do Taste of Scotland, because the Taste of Scotland menu, and it's just phenomenal. Yeah. So we sat up in Amber, and you get 3 main courses in little pots. So maybe it might be trout, a wee bit venison, and something else. And then, you get 3 starters first, and then you get 3 main courses, and then you get your dessert matched with a dram. And it's no hassle. You don't have to bother looking at the menu, and it's phenomenal food.
Yeah, and I would say as well, like, just coming in and speaking to our team, be it in the bar in Amber or in the shop. Yeah. And the one thing is with our team, they get so passionate about the product. And, we're set up to basically convert people to Scotch whisky. That's what we want to do. We want to, get them inspired, enthused about the product. And, they are just looking to showcase that knowledge, and they want to speak to people and take that kind of deeper dive into it. So come in and just meet the staff and have those conversations with the team, because they love talking about Scotch whisky.
And how can people find either yourselves on Instagram or social media, and also Scotch Whisky Experience? What's the best way for people to get engaged and
website?
On the website. What about yourselves individually? You got your own social media platform you want to push?
Plug it.
No, one of the team asked me earlier on, they're like, are you calling yourself an influencer? And I was like, I have called myself an influencer, but no, I'm not.
Do you have a TikTok?
No, I'm on TikTok far too much. But I think, just through the website, and we've got, the Scotch Whisky Experience and Amber are active on Instagram, Facebook. There's loads of ways that you can engage with us.
Brilliant.
And the great thing about the Scotch Whisky Experience is I built the castle right next to you as well.
I know, it was very handy.
Brilliant. Lenka, yourself, is there anything, your social media, you're all right with that? No? All right with that? Fine, fantastic. That's fine, okay. That's why you don't get back to me.
Thank you so much.
Anyway, listen, thank you so much. Thanks for the drums. Thanks for having us. Thanks for the conversations. Thanks to everybody who listens to the podcast. Remember, give us 5 stars. Keep passing the pod. Get involved. We've got the newsletter now. Just subscribe to the newsletter. Loads and loads of cool, sort of unique content that we'll be doing. We've got interviews with different people that have been on the podcast before. The only newsletter, guys. Get on the Facebook group. It's fantastic. Weekend Dram Roll Call every Friday, 6:30. Doesn't have to, you don't, just post your dram. Just post your dram. You had Lance Morgan the other day there talking about it on the podcast. He said, I live down in England. I don't get access to the whiskies that you have. Yeah. I don't have a diggers round the corner from me. I can't just go in there and try it. So I take your recommendations as what's good to buy, so I don't waste my money. So if he says what he sees what people are putting in the Weekend Dram Roll Call, he'll say, right, I'll go and source that whiskey and buy it. That's what kind of the thing we're looking at.
Meet enthusiasts from around the world who all listen to our pish. Everybody's having a good time. Thank you for watching. Give us 5 stars.
Get us on the YouTube channel as well.
Thank you for having us.
And check out the Inchterny Distillery stuff as well. An absolutely fantastic episode that we did there. Angus absolutely did himself in the sample room when he had to do the grain or malt challenge. You'll see that if you've not already seen it. But thank you very much, Susan, and Lenka, for coming on. All the very best.
Cheers.
Slanjava! Cheers! Well done.
Oh God, but that was getting long. I was worried.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
I was like, I need to get 9 stories out.
The last 3 drops, no point
Oh.
saving that.
Close there.
Go on. Oh, you should give my guess first.